So now apparently the robots can beat us at everything. We can't have any nice things anymore. Hey, what's up everyone? This is Alvin Teaches Poker, and my birthday is next week, but all of the presents came early. My poker analyst sugar daddy came through, and now I present to you hands and strategies played by Pluribus, the first multi-way poker bot that can beat the crap out of humans. And not just any old humans, I'm talking about some elite ass players. So a bunch of AI guys over at Carnegie Mellon followed in the footsteps of other games that robots crush us at, like checkers, chess, and apparently Jeopardy, which is kind of amazing. And now we have a bot that can beat players as strong as Linus Loeliger. So I wanted to talk about some of the hands from this experiment, but before I go on, I have to shout out Kevin Wang, who, out of the goodness of his heart, created a Python script that converted all of the researchers' terribly strange formats into actually readable PokerStars hands, and he did some very basic analysis here. You should all check it out at kevinwang.us, Wang Gang. I've gone ahead and imported all of the hands from this experiment. Unfortunately, it's only a 10K sample size. And so when you look at all of the other players, which have been nicknamed very cutely after Quentin Tarantino references, you'll see that many of these players do not have nearly 10K hands, which is also unfortunate because I am pretty confident that Linus Love is either Oren Ishii or Bud. Both of which have very, very small sample sizes. Although out of this sample, I also will say that Mr. Blue seems to be an extraordinarily strong player. And as you can see from this graph, he actually ends up winning 15 buy-ins over this 10K sample size. So I'm definitely not sure which player is which, but I'm just going to put my 2 cents in and say that Oren Ishii is Linus Love. So I went ahead and combed through all of the pre-flop data and kind of put together some basic ranges that I think Pluribus is using in common spots. So in a 6-handed game opening from the hijack, it's openly folding 2s and 3s and definitely prefers opening a hand like 7-6 and 6-5 over other suited connectors. In a lot of spots, PIO likes V-pipping, calling, or 3-betting with 7-6, but it'll open fold 9-8. So somehow it can see into the future and realize 9-8 probably gets coolered a lot more often than 7-6 does against a lot of other hands. But something about its pre-flop play prefers suited connectors with 6s over having 9-8. Sometimes it opens Queen-Jack offsuit, sometimes it folds it. Also, I've seen it open King-10 offsuit, but I've also seen it open fold 8-7 a bunch of times. Looking at the low jack, it still open folds deuces, which is pretty crazy. And unlike humans, Pluribus seems to really give a lot of preference to having these suited kings. So as you can see in the hijack, it opens King-5 suited, and the low jack it opens King-5 suited. It might open some combinations of King-4 suited, but I haven't seen enough hands to confidently say so. And it probably folds some of these hands some percentage of the time, but I think from the sample I did not see it actually mixing from the low jack, but considering that it mixes raising and folding from every other position, it's bound to have some folds here. Here in the cutoff, you actually now open deuces. I saw it raising Queen-5 suited, but open folding 7-5 suited, I believe. And on the offsuit side, these are actually pretty standard, raising all cards that are 10 or higher, and Ace-8 offsuit seem pretty reasonable from the cutoff. By the way, all of these raise sizes seem to be pretty randomized between 2x and 2.5x, with the majority of the raises being in the 2.25x region. Similarly, when Pluribus 3-bets in position, it normally 3-bets to 3.5x in position, but sometimes it 3-bets to exactly 3x, and one time I believe I saw it rebet with King-X suited to 5x in position, which seemed to make no sense whatsoever, and I wonder how it balances in that spot. On the button, if it's open folded to Pluribus, it opens about 42% of hands, and definitely does not open all of the suited hands. which you'll see a lot of stronger players do in order to get their steal frequency up to 50%. And if you look at many of their players in the sample size, you'll see that their attempt to steal on the button is indeed 50%. Here, I found it also interesting that Pluribus really does not like playing these ultra low suited connectors and just goes ahead and tosses them in nearly every situation. Now, I'm also really interested in what Pluribus is 3-betting in position, and so I built a little spreadsheet here where, facing different raise sizes, I analyze how often Pluribus cold calls versus 3-bets. Some very clear patterns quickly emerge. Under the gun opens about 20% of hands, and from middle position, we very rarely call, and we do so with a pretty tight range and occasionally 6-5 suited. And we also 3-bet pretty infrequently. Mostly 3-betting our pretty strong hands, but definitely mixing between flats and 3-bets with a hand like queens. Although the one time I saw Pluribus flat with queens, after another player squeezed it, then 4-bet. So occasionally Pluribus flats here, intending to reshove over a squeeze. Pluribus's 3-bets should go up as it approaches the button. Over this 10k sample, it's hard to see that in this particular formation. But if you look at how Pluribus plays from an eagle eye, you'll see that as it approaches the button, it begins to 3-bet more, and as it approaches the button, it drastically begins to cold call more raises. That makes a lot of sense, particularly when played with a zero rake structure. When you start analyzing with new data, I think it's always most interesting to analyze the loose situations, so I'm mostly going to be spending a lot of my time analyzing cutoff versus button, button versus big blind type scenarios. And so the first ranges that I've mapped out in terms of flats and 3-bets are going to be button versus cutoff and button versus small blind. So here, this is about a visual estimation of what I think Pluribus is 3-betting on the button. As you'd expect, it's usually 3-betting its very strong hands, but very notably it does trap with some hands as strong as ace, king, and queens. And this is a spot where I've seen Pluribus never VPIP 9-8 suited as either a flat or a 3-bet, so I've discounted it from this range completely. However, Pluribus does occasionally 3-bet hands like 7s or 6s, although it seems to flat those hands, and most pocket pairs. I actually might be wrong, and that it might open full deuces to a cutoff raise, but it's possible in this 10k sample this scenario has simply just never come up. When you look at how other players play, many of them play similarly. They cold call more as they approach the button, they generally 3-bet, but here, this is definitely one of those players who doesn't really have a cold calling range in middle position or in the cutoff, and mostly just 3-bet or folds, and does about the same from the small blind, and this is a strategy that you would expect to see in a high rake game. But here in a no rake game, I definitely think that this player can have more cold calls in nearly every spot. Now, I'm going to spend a lot more time analyzing how Pluribus plays facing 3-bets, 4-bets, how often it squeezes, which seems to be quite often. But for now, mostly I was interested in seeing how similarly Pluribus would be playing to Piosolver. So I picked out a hand that I thought was particularly interesting and wanted to see if Piosolver agreed with its somewhat fantastic results. So Pluribus has dealt good old pocket rockets from under the gun and opens to a 5. And Mr. Blue calls. This is probably too loose of a defense, though when I build this pre-flop model, I do give him the benefit of the doubt and say that this is going to be a minority defense, and here I add in a couple extra 0.5s and 0.25s to reflect that Mr. Blue's defending probably slightly too loosely to 225 pre-flop. So Pluribus flops top set. Let's see how it plays. So bets half pot. I've noticed a lot of the time Pluribus doesn't go for a down bet on the flop, and it doesn't really need to. The down bet is a strategy that is used to simplify GTO's polarized strategies, but because Pluribus is a robot, it can just polarize and use multiple bet sizes and mix between different strategies effortlessly. So he just calls. Mr. Blue turns the straight and checks. Pluribus now pots, which makes a lot of sense. And again here, this is probably a spot where if Mr. Blue raises, he's only going to get action from Jack 10, made flushes. And when Pluribus sizes up on the turn, it's most likely it's polarizing between its very strongest hands and very strongest bluffs. So when it's polarized so strongly, you definitely need to have a calling down range. And Mr. Blue also has a little bit of backup equity with the 5 of diamonds. Mr. Blue calls, and the river's deuce, which Mr. Blue should check, and just call down. especially if Pluribus is going to bet like 3,000 or overbet the river. And Pluribus checks. I showed this to Persuadio, a coach I occasionally talk some poker with, and he said, well, that's not fair. And so I was kind of curious, should Pluribus check here with top set blocking the ace of diamonds? So here I've set up this model, giving Pluribus 2 bet sizes on the flop, turn, and river with an all-in. Although in rare instances, I bet Pluribus will also 150 this flop. But when I ran a preliminary model using that, it didn't come up very often. Here, I've given Mr. Blue no flop leading range, and just used extremely cursory bet and raise sizes in every other spot, simply to get a vague idea of how good this line is. I think if we add in a bunch of other bet sizes for Pluribus that it occasionally will use, the amount of EV that it will gain is going to be extremely trivial, and those lines are going to be extremely minority lines. Using a 25, 150, or 200 here is not really going to be that useful in practice. So Mr. Blue checks, and on this fairly coordinated flop, PIO really likes betting half pot, occasionally potting it with your stronger hands, and checking very frequently. Notice that aces, 8s, 7s, and ace-8 are virtually never slow plays, but because aces blocks your opponent's calling range so strongly, it usually is going to be a 250 bet instead of a 500. So bets 250, and 6 of clubs, 5 of diamonds actually seems to be a majority raise hand, even though I initially thought it was going to be a hand that almost always check calls. However, this is certainly a draw with reasonable blockers and your worst showdown value, so I can definitely see why it's going to be considered a check raise. If you compare the EV between the two lines, seems like it's pretty negligible either way. So Mr. Blue calls, and the turn is the 9 of diamonds. We can see that despite the 9 of diamonds being one of Mr. Blue's best turn cards, he should still almost never lead into the under the gun player. Not surprisingly, the under the gun player really wants to see high cards, which is going to give him nut advantages, as well as very low cards, which are going to completely whiff for the big blind player. So Mr. Blue checks. As you can see on turns that are very good for Pluribus, it really likes using a pot size bet on kings, queens, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and it's very likely that if I gave Pluribus a 150 or 200 bet size on the turn, it would err on using some of those. Here, when Pluribus has aces without the diamond, it definitely prefers a larger bet, but when it has aces with the ace of diamonds, it seems fairly ambivalent between betting larger, betting half pot, or even occasionally checking. So Pluribus bets half pot, and the river is a 2. Here on the river, Mr. Blue should virtually check his entire range. And now the big question is, should Pluribus check back pocket aces? Holy shnikes. Yep, pocket aces seems to be a 100% check back. And why is this? Let's say Pluribus bets 2,000 on the river. What hands call him? Well, he's definitely going to get called by the 2 pairs that got to the river, some combinations of ace-king and ace-queen. But a lot of these hands are going to be severely discounted because, after all, Pluribus is holding 2 aces. So the other hands that call are going to be straights, lower sets, and then all of these flushes which call or raise the river. So here on the river, Pluribus says most of the hands that call me on the river that don't include an ace are going to be flushes and straights, so there's no reason to bet here. Oddly, you can see that ace-jack with the ace of diamonds is a better hand to bet than top set, because this hand blocks your opponent from having the nut flush draw and a lot of straights. So there you have it, the first Pluribus hand I put into Piosolver, and already it seems to be agreeing. Of course, I've run a few other interesting hands through Piosolver, and Piosolver thinks that Pluribus is a huge fish in some spots. So stay tuned, I'll be analyzing those in the coming videos. There's so much information to go through, I'm so excited to dig through it. And if you guys want to see it, I'll keep posting these videos. Please like and subscribe, it helps out so much. I imagine in the coming days I'll be doing analysis on how Pluribus plays out of position, in position, how it plays in 3-bet pots, multi-way pots, and then I'm also going to be analyzing some of the best hands that the humans play against each other. This is just such a treasure trove of information, and Triton London is coming up next week, so there's going to be a ton of high-stakes action. I can't wait to share it all with you. See you soon. Good luck.